we have started, and people will come in still. However, let's not, delay all of this too much. Are you enjoying the weather? Are you enjoying the conference? Okay, that was slightly louder, so that is positive. So welcome everyone. My name is Sander Chan. I'm assistant professor of environmental governance at this university, working with Ingrid, who is also here. And I have the honor to moderate this session, this semi-plenary on fostering emancipation and courage for sustainability transformations. And I hope you enjoyed day one. Did you enjoy day one? Yes? Okay, good, good. At least 2 people. But if you were at our opening plenary, you saw kind of the breadth and the depth of transformation that we need to engage in currently, and how far we are away from where we should be, really. What also became clear in the opening plenary was the need to insert values and to challenge existing power relations. And that requires courage, and it requires a voice, especially for those voices that are less heard. It requires emancipation. Therefore, this semi-plenary really zooms into the role of different actors and the need for courage and emancipation towards sustainability transformations. And before we move into our excellent panel, because we do have an excellent panel for you, let me invite the audience, both in the room and online, to join the conversation. After the panel presentations, you will have the opportunity to pose questions, but also comments. We want you to engage in the discussion. If you're online, you can use the Zoom chat, and we look forward to your thoughts as well. But without further ado, I will introduce you to our first speaker, and that is Marjan Smulders. Marjan is a microbiologist and studies the adaptation of bacteria to changes in the environment, right? And all with a view on environmental impacts, for instance, with wastewater treatment. But apart from that, Marjan, you are also a climate activist. You are an activist with Scientists for Future, the Netherlands chapter, and Scientist Rebellion, the Netherlands. So I think you can talk a lot about us, many of us as researchers, and how we can become activists and have the courage to maybe go beyond our day-to-day research work. Marjan.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. I am honored and also a bit scared. I'll be honest. I'm going to talk to you not about my work today as a microbiologist. I'm going to talk to you as my second job as a climate activist, a science climate activist. And let's have a look. God, yeah. So I want to talk to you about how scientists can get out of the lab and onto the streets, and how this can drive sustainable transformations, and how important this is that scientists do this. I want to zoom out first. I don't know if you can see this, but if you look at the picture on the left, it is a view of Earth as from Voyager, the space probe, as it is leaving our solar system. And it's actually only 1 pixel on the photo. It shows you how empty space is and how special our planet is. If we zoom a little bit in, then you can see the thin layer of atmosphere surrounding our planet. And within this thin layer, there is the biosphere in which all life on Earth takes place. Our only home is this planet. There is no planet B, and it's in serious trouble. And the serious trouble is quite well illustrated by this figure, which is a combination of the planetary boundaries as identified by the Rockstrom Institute and the donut as identified by Kate Rayworth. So the donut is bounded by an ecological ceiling, and the ecological ceiling consists of 9 planetary boundaries. This is an older picture, so on this picture you see that the 4 of the boundaries are crossed, but in fact the chemical pollution, the fresh water withdrawals, has now also been quantified, and this boundary has been crossed quite significantly. Air pollution is on its way to be crossed, and about 7 million people globally a year die of air pollution. In fact, the only planetary boundary that's is actually improving is the ozone layer. And the rest is all moving far out or about to be crossed. And then in addition to the planetary boundaries, we also have the social justice part of this. And for a good life, people need these social dimensions as identified by Kate Rayworth. And if you can see that the social dimensions are for large population part of the world, don't actually reach the minimum standards for a good life. So not to undo the importance of all these planetary boundaries, I want to now focus on climate change, because this is where I've been focusing on in the last 1.5 years most. So climate change will zoom out in time this time. So humans have been part of the life on this earth for about 300,000 years. And only in the past 75,000 years they started spreading. And you can see if on this graph, which shows you over time, 100,000 years, the temperature anomaly, which is the temperature difference, compared to the average in kind of the mid-20th century. And you can see that for most of the time, it was a lot cooler than it was in the 20th century. And that's because this was an ice age. Okay, it's not wanting to move. Yes, an ice age. Right, and you can also see that at this point here, about 10,000 years ago, temperature started getting warmer and more stable. And in that stable period is the period that's... Oh, God. Yes? It's not working very well. Can you move it on? In that stable period is when human society started flourishing, agriculture started blossoming, and civilization, sorry about the typo, started blossoming, and humans could start their cultural development. You can also see that despite the temperature going down a little bit, at this point, yes, where the steam engine was invented in about 1750, the temperature started increasing. And this is, of course, due to the CO2 emissions, due to burning of fossil fuels. Yeah. So this is a figure that Matthias Schmelzer showed you last night as well. It's one of my favorite figures, and it's one of the figures we use in Scientist Rebellion a lot. And this shows you the CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere and over the time from 1960 to 2020, and also in color the heating of the Earth. And it's also actually the story of my life, because I was born in 1972, the year that the Club of Rome published its first report on limits to growth. It was real bombshell then. And since then, we've had a lot of reports and a lot of talk by politicians. But you can see CO2 kept climbing and the temperature kept rising. In fact, our fellow climate scientists have been trying really hard to warn us since 1990 in 6 IPCC assessment reports. And I think as academics and science, we should really stand with our colleagues here, because this is really frustrating and disheartening if your science is being so ignored. So what can we do? We really should be courageous, and we should really make ourselves unignorable as academics. So this is difficult to see, but this slide comes from the slide deck from the IPCC in response to the synthesis report of the sixth assessment in the spring. And it says our choices that we will make in the coming decade will reverberate for hundreds, even thousands of years. Now, this is an enormous responsibility for the people who are alive at the moment. And it can feel overwhelming, and it can feel very saddening and depressing. It does to me anyway, and I know it does to a lot of other people. Because we can see what's happening already with only 1.2 degrees warming. So this quote from the Lord of the Rings tries to give me some comfort. I wish it need not have happened in my time, said Frodo. So do I, said Gandalf. And so do all who live to see such times. But it is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what all we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. So what do we do with the time that's given us? And as scientists, we are often called neutral, or we should be neutral. But I want to point out that in the past, science activism was really quite common and normal, actually, and was expected of scientists. So if you look at Albert Einstein, who was a peace activist, and who would rather be stateless than join the army. Jane Goodall, who fought for the protection of the habitats in Africa. Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring, fighting against the use of the pesticide DDT. And Charles Darwin, a naturalist, who defied the habitual animal cruelty that was common in science. So, there we go again. Scientists have a duty to society to act. When writing papers, blogs, sharing data, writing letters, giving policy advice is not enough to avert disaster. So we have a privilege to know, and we should be really, really grateful for that privilege, but that gives us a duty to act. And we can do that in several ways. So one way is to do individual action by giving lectures, giving webinars, talking to the public, talking to colleagues. But you can also take action as a group, try lobbying, give advice to policymakers, give advice to curricula, for example. You can write letters, open letters, signed by many scientists. And I give 2 examples here. This is an open letter that scientists drafted, and it was signed by more than 400 Dutch scientists against the permit that was given last year for new fossil fuel extraction, new gas extraction in the North Sea. And really happily, this Monday, the Dutch IPCC authors sent a letter to our government urging adequate climate action. They think it's not going fast enough. So it's really nice that even the IPCC authors are stepping up now and raising their voice. The other thing you can do is hit the street. So this is a large climate action, and scientists joining that action really supports the call for action by these climate activists. It gives legitimacy to the climate movement. There's one step further you can take, and that is, he doesn't want to do it. Oh, Scientists for Future is a group of scientists that are taking part in all these kind of actions. Yeah, so from individual actions, webinars, to taking the streets and legal demonstrations. But there is one further step you can take, and that is civil disobedience. And Scientist Rebellion is a global group of scientists, and I'm in the Dutch chapter of it. We are taking action that is not necessarily legal, so disruptive actions. And this is the first demonstration, or the first action we took last year, blocking the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate, demanding adequate climate action. So I'm going to say a bit more about civil disobedience. So this is a quote by Antonio Guterres, who said this year, when he was talking about the ecological crisis: we need disruption to end the destruction. And disruption is important, but disruption is always important to change, because change doesn't occur on its own. And I'm into peaceful disruption, so that's civil disobedience. I'll give you a few examples of civil disobedience that was really driving social change in the past. And this one is the suffragettes in the UK in the first decades of the 20th century, who were fighting for the right of women to vote. They chained themselves to the the fences of Westminster and were arrested for it. They weren't always peaceful, by the way. They also threw bombs, taking really good care not to hurt anyone. But yeah, they were quite some ladies, these. They are my heroes, actually. Then really famous, of course, is anti-colonialism. And decolonialist action really required civil disobedience. This is Mahatma Gandhi and his salt march in India, demanding the right to harvest salt, which they had to buy from the oppressing UK regime. And then, of course, in the civil rights movement in the USA, Martin Luther King was arrested for disobeying the law. And this caused at the time a lot of antipathy and people not agreeing with this. But if you look back now, these people are on the right side of history, of course. Civil disobedience is important. And what it is, it's the active, public, conscientious refusal of a citizen to obey certain laws, demands, orders or commands of a government or any other authority with the aim to bring about a change in law or government policies. All right. Civil disobedience by scientists is, and climate action in general by scientists, is becoming more of a discourse in even in scientific journals now. And this is really good. I think we need this discussion to give more support to the scientists who put their neck out and stand up for a better world for all. So if you want to join Scientist Rebellion, for example, there's a global movement, and there are scientists taking actions in more than 25 countries now. So just look on Scientist Rebellion on internet, and you can find support there, also financial support for countries that need it. So civil disobedience by scientists is really powerful. So what we've seen happen in the past 1.5 years that Scientist Rebellion in the Netherlands been active, we've seen that we've created a network of academics, which is really important. And despite this photo, what I really love about this network is the lack of hierarchy. So we are really, it's a really socially safe place. And it gives emotional support in times of distress, which we often feel. It's a very regenerative culture. What we also see is that the fact that it lends legitimacy to the broader climate movement is very important for climate activists, and we hear this every time we're on the street with our lab coats. So this is Greta Thunberg, and you can see what civil disobedience can do in a year's time. This is us in a roadblock where we're being sprayed by the water cannons. Being on the front line there, other activists really feel supported by this. The other... Yes. So what we found is that we get connection with NGOs. So we learn from them how to organize effective actions, but we also give them the science that they sometimes need for their actions. And what's really nice, we're connecting with the arts, with museums, and we'll hear a bit more about this later. Really important, because for social change to happen, social scientists tell us we need about 25% of the population to really step up and raise their voice. So we need to reach more people, and I think the arts are really important in this. So connecting with arts has been a really bonus in this 1.5 years. And then last but least, the messenger effect. So we find that the scientists, we have access to the media listen to us. And this is a couple of weeks ago, we were actually we're in the top 100 of the Trouw sustainability ranking. And we reached second place. And the first place is Extinction Rebellion. Yes, that's really cool. I was really impressed. So it means that civil disobedience is also seen in Dutch society at least as important and meaningful. All right. Last slide. Universities also need to take action. So as Scientist Rebellion, we also look inwards. We need to take a leading role. We need to raise awareness. And this is an IPCC reading marathon at Wageningen University to raise awareness about the synthesis report of the 6th assessment by the IPCC. We also urge our university to become climate neutral way before 2050, because that's way too late for northern countries. It's not fair. We've used up our carbon budgets, and we need to be climate neutral far sooner than 2050. we also need to make sure that the money flows go from fossil to sustainable, otherwise nothing's going to change. So we urge our universities to bank, to ensure and invest sustainably. Our pension funds we don't have to do anymore because they've already switched, so that's really cool. It took a lot of effort, but our pension fund is pulling out of fossil now. Then our students started demanding that universities cut the ties with fossil industries. Really important because fossil industries use this as greenwashing and to legitimize their actions. Oops, it's a noise. And what is really important as well is that we educate our students, that we give them the tools to handle the climate crisis and to bring about solutions. And the action is called the elephant in the lecture hall. We actually demanding our universities to give climate education to all students. And what we're asking from our universities is support. We want support for activists, students and staff. So we feel supported when we stick our neck out and go on the street. This is my presentation. I urge you all to become as courageous as you can. Take your role in the climate movement because we are in an emergency. I welcome you very much to this really inspiring and regenerative movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne, for reminding us that activism and scholarship actually can and historically also often went together, and that we should make ourselves unignorable when it comes to sustainability transformations. Next, I have the privilege to introduce you to Yunia Musazi. Yunia has more than 18 years of experience in development work, and more than 10 years specifically in the water, sanitation and environment sector. Yunia, your work involves communities at all levels, and you influence the major development agendas and have been working on building strong wash systems. So I'm sure you can enlighten us about courage and what it takes to make a change.
Sure. Thank you, Sander. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here and to try and zoom in to a sector I'm more familiar with and see how we can bridge, to bridge the synergies between science, research, and the water sanitation and hygiene sector. In my presentation, I'll first give a global overview of where we are and then zoom into what is required, the key elements of bridging that gap between science and practice, but then also share with you a case study from my country, Uganda, where I come from, depicting this exact scenario. So, for those of you who attended our semi-plenary yesterday, I still shared this, that we're happy to note that with the UN Water Conference that happened earlier this year in March, water, sanitation, and hygiene have been recognized as a human right, and many countries globally ensuring that this happens by incorporating it within their constitutions, that yes, indeed, water, sanitation, and hygiene, in brief, which is WASH, is a human right and a common good that is required for sustainable development, ensuring that we eradicate poverty, and contributes to many other aspects of the livelihood of different people. So SDG 6 is solely focusing on this and ensuring that we identify targets within different countries of how we should attain this universal access to water and sanitation. So where are we currently? As per the joint monitoring program that's conducted by UN Water, UNICEF, and other stakeholders, where we are currently in terms of globally, 3.5 billion people still don't have access to safely managed sanitation. And if you look at that map, the figures where you see much of the raid and leaning towards, anyway, towards brown, the darker the red is indicating countries, mainly in Africa, that are indicating access of between 0% to 25%. So the blue and the darker shades of blue, that's indicating between 99% to 76%. So like you can see, we still have a big challenge. However, the gray, like we all know, and this is where you need to come in, some of these countries don't have the data that they submit for the joint monitoring program to compile this assessment. My country where I come from in Uganda, if you localize this, in Africa, when it comes to sanitation, we still register around 800 million Africans not having access to safely managed sanitation. In my country, it comes down to 42 million. Sorry, this is water, not sanitation. And when it comes to sanitation, it's more or less still the same, where you still find that the continents, more or less Africa, the red and the leaning towards yellow registers between 0 to 50%, you know, of communities that have access to safely managed sanitation. So why is that the case? And yet researchers have confirmed that if you invest $1 in water and sanitation, you get a return that's close to $5. So is that important? And we as advocates, Maya, we join you in trying to convince the key decision makers, presidents, the ministries that are responsible to prioritize water and sanitation. But this is not the case where we are now. And during the UN Water Conference, 5 key indicators were identified that are key if we are to bridge this gap both globally and nationally. One of them is availability of finance. And from all the commitments that were given by the different countries to bridge this gap, we registered around $300 million that was registered and committed by different countries. But then there's also a need for data and information, and this is where you'd solely come in as academicians to support us in ensuring that we generate the evidence that is required to, first of all, identify what the barriers are and how to address them. We need to build the capacity of the different stakeholders, more so women who are the sole the burden of ensuring that there's access to clean water and sanitation at household level mainly falls on the children and the women. And currently in some countries, like where I come from, 70% of our population is youth. So it's important to make sure that their capacity is built so that they're also around on the round table in these discussions. Then, as you scientists come about with innovations regards different technology or approaches that need to bridge this gap, they need to make sure that the innovations speak to the context or to the issues that we as practitioners bring on table. Then, of course, there's need for governance, where governments are responsible to ensure that policies are in place that propel water sanitation for all. So I pick out 4 main areas that we need to speak to if we're to bridge, the synergies between science and practice. And one of them is to recognize that we need to collaborate. Right from the time of when we're initiating programs, we as the practitioners, you need to be on the table for us to share with you ideas, then you can inform us also, but also to help us, for you to help us with generating the evidence and also coming up with the right approaches that have been proven to work in different scenarios. So this calls for mapping out all the key stakeholders, multi-sectors, with the health, education, and water, also agriculture and climate change, but also coming up with innovations that are inclusive, like I've mentioned, gender, indigenous people, and the disabled. And these approaches, they need to be context-based. For instance, where science may come in, let's say there's an outbreak of cholera, which is more or less so much related to, absence of access to clean water. That has to really be context-based, because the same approach you apply in urban areas where there's water, but maybe you just need to focus more on behavior change, is not the same that you'd apply in rural, where you'd ensure that the 80% of the population who live in the rural areas have access to clean water. Then, of course, it has to be scalable and actionable across different boundaries. So zooming into a specific case study from my country, Uganda, which is based in East Africa. And that map there is the map of my country. I want to relate to a case study around the hand pump. The picture that you see there is a typical example of a borehole, that is installed, commonly found in Africa. And currently it's registered that 200 million people in Africa use hand pumps, and 700,000 hand pumps have been registered to be in existence on the continent. However, the way initially when the hand pump was introduced, it was solely made out of metal. And we all know that metal and this contact with water is not good. So for many years, when the hand pumps were introduced, there was so much rapid corrosion between metal to metal, which led to bad water quality, bad taste, color, high iron, high maintenance costs. So in the early 1990s, there was a program that was being implemented by DANIDA in partnership with the government of Uganda and different NGOs. They started undertaking different studies. Why is this happening? Why is it that in some cases where the hand pumps were installed, the water, instead of producing clean water, instead were getting dirty water? So what happened was different studies informed the conclusion because of the metal that was used. So in 2016, November, government of Uganda, caused some disruption, just like Maya mentioned. At times, for transformative change, there's need for disruption. You can imagine a number of stakeholders, private sector, donors, NGOs had stocked many of these hand pumps, but they had to be banned from using them. And the government recommended that there is need now to have a combination of high-grade stainless steel or lead-free PVC to avoid the issues that I mentioned earlier. So where we are now with this ban, it has been, implemented since 2016 in the country, and there's a study that was done by WaterAid 5 years down the line in one of the districts where they're operating, and they compared that before the ban, the communities that indicated no breakdown were less than 1%. But 4 years down the line after the ban, the communities that indicated no breakdown had risen to 92.7%. Then those who indicated changing water quality were 0.2% before the ban. But after the ban, it had risen to 96.7% who declared that the water was of better quality and good taste. So where we are now, this initiative is being scaled up. It already is being implemented in Ghana and Chad. And currently, we have a team in Uganda who are documenting it further, and they want to scale it up to the rest of Africa. So when we talk about courage and sustainability and change, this is a typical example. And of course, science working together with practice to enable this to happen. And that's a typical, now the modified hand pump being promoted by one of the stakeholders. So as I conclude, only together can we ensure sustainable water and sanitation management is not just an aspiration, but a global reality. So I think, just like Maya shared, and this case study, we can see that you can start small, with evidence generated from a small area, but then eventually you impact, a wider scale from even beyond one country. Thank you very much.
So yeah, thank you, Unia, for showing us the specific case of access to safe water and sanitation, and how that also takes courage. So we have seen different domains, right? We started with climate change, and we just heard from Unia about safe water access, but now we move on to nature as well. We have Klaas Kuitenbrouwer with us, and Klaas is a researcher at het Nieuwe Instituut in Rotterdam. After studying history and developing an art practice, you've been teaching media and theory at the Rietveld Art Academy since 2002. And a consistent element in your work is that it's at the intersection between different knowledge practices, technological, artistic, legal, scientific, and also non-human. At the Nieuwe Instituut in Rotterdam, you're currently developing the ZOOP project on collaboration between humans and collective bodies of non-humans. So I think that perfectly fits our theme about emancipation as well. So please take the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Ingrid and Sander, for inviting me. Thank you very much for showing up. The slides that I sent in a font which didn't install, so the slides this one looks a little bit mangled, but basically you can see the point. I'm here to talk about the ZOOP project. This is basically your introduction, but then in text. It's not going well. It's not looking good. Summarized, I would say the main point that ZOOP addresses is that the life-carrying capacity of the planet, the life-sustaining capacity of the planet, is currently diminishing. And that means that efforts at sustainability, that aim for net zero, that aim for, let's say, reducing toxic behavior and reducing emissions, are just not going to cut it. Even if we end up at net zero, even if we end up at fully renewable materials, then we're still in trouble. So our efforts should not be aimed at sustainability in its limited sense, but actually at strong sustainability, or in other words, at regeneration. At increasing, human efforts should be focused on increasing the life-sustaining capacity of the planet. This is not easy. This is not an easy job. Our knowledge practices, our financial systems, our economic logic, our technologies are all predicated on the division between the world of humans with its own agendas, its own focus points and its own concerns, and the world of nature, the world of the non-humans on the other end, that green opaque space known as nature, which is never where you are because you're human. ZOOP tries to address this. Basically, I'll take you along a couple of easy pictures, low resolution images. This is a cosmogram, basically a depiction of a worldview. This is the worldview from the default economic actor, understanding value systems, understanding, let's say, the way knowledge and practices are organized, always through the lens of economy, and a more particularly capitalist economy. And then ecology is understood through this lens. It's as at best a system of ecological services that basically service economic processes, serve economic processes, and can be calculated and can be calculated in an economic way. The risk, if you've heard Matthias Smeltzer talking yesterday already. You've probably addressed this topic many times before. But the risk of this is basically very short. That as soon as you attach a value to a forest, let's say 100,000 euros, then that exact forest becomes interchangeable with a large Tesla or with a small yacht or a holiday home. And it becomes capital, and capital can flow and should flow. This is the whole point of capital. So the first thing we need to do is kind of realign this cosmogram, basically do the exact opposite, and then figure out what this tells you. This is not a solution, this is just a shift in attitude, a shift in perspective. To understand basically reality and the set of values for which all bodies operate, including human bodies, as ecological, pluriversal, chemical, political, aesthetic, phosphor, nitrogen, oxygen, water, all types of relations. All relations are ecological relations. All material relations, all political relations, all aesthetic relations are ecological. And then economy is a subset of those set of relations, and it's a problematic one. It's the one that dominates all others and that eats away on the outside of this grey sphere what is known as this set of ecological relations. But at least this cosmogram gives us this starting point from which to act. The other one will not do it in any way. The other one leads to sustainability as is. This offers you another possibility. So where we think we should go is something like this. This is currently not in existence. This is an imaginary future cosmogram in which the distinction between ecology and economy is dissolved. Basically, we talk about an economy that is regenerative, a regenerative economy. An economy that basically takes care of all life. Another way to put it would be a human inclusive ecosystem. An ecosystem that is not looking, that does not stop at the borders of the world of humans, but actually includes humans and sustains humans as well. In order to get across this maybe kind of a confusion of terms, we invented a term. I'm not sure if this is helpful, but we do it anyway. Zoonomy, basically an economy that takes care of all life. This is where we should go for. And then this grey circle in the middle is the economy of humans. And it's in full exchange with a nitrogen cycle, with a water cycle, with a CO2 cycle, with other material cycles, or maybe the economy of beavers or the economy of ants or whatever. And all these economies kind of interchange and interlink and support each other. This is where we should go. This is once we've solved this, we're done. Other problems will emerge, but then we are not limited by time anymore. Then we have the time on our hands again. In other words, in our practice and our perspective, there's a hard cut between sustainable and regenerative. On the left hand, we have practices that won't cut it. The middle one tries to mitigate the really violent parts of the left column, but it's basically trying to sustain economy as is. It's not trying to make a transition, it's trying to preserve as much of what we have. And this, by now we can know this will not cut it. So between the middle and the right column is a distinction. Not all practices sit either in the middle or on the right. Of course, there's a lot of crossovers. This is an ideal version of a set of ideas. But we need to move to a net positive approach to an economy that is aimed at long-term forever sustainability. And that's not capitalism but sovereign, but this is degrowth or post-growth. Okay. So ZOOP is designed as a model to get you from either the left or the middle to the right. It's an organization model, a learning process and a basis for collaboration for organizations that want to make this change from either being on business as violent capitalism or softened capitalism to a practice that is actually regenerative, that legitimately can be called regenerative. It is based on the word, maybe this is obvious, cooperation with Zoe, zooperation, so cooperation with all life. In a nutshell, actually I'll skip this one because I've said it already. It's an organization model, a learning process and a basis for collaboration. And it works like this. This is, let's say, the cosmogram I just showed you, but then on the scale of the organization, this is again the default economic actor to whom ecology is an issue and a question, and it's not us. But it's something we need to work with, but we don't really know how. And we're not there, it's over there, nature. The first move that happens, if you become concerned, if you step into the actual let this sink in, the current, I'm referring to you the slides, the first slides of your presentation. If you let it sink in, and that you realize that all your actions are actually part of ecological processes and nothing is outside of it, then you begin to feel something like this. And like, no matter where we are, I'm in the middle of it. Which is can feel suffocating. It feels like, sorry, I was almost going to say a word I'm not supposed to use in public presentations, but it feels suffocating and it feels you cannot act and whatever you do is wrong. At the same time, the moment, and this happens to people that, let's say, adopt this practice, as soon as you begin to feel that, yes, with everything you do, you are in the middle of ecosystems, this can also feel liberating. This means that whatever you do already matters. Even if you didn't know it, then whatever, every breath, every step, every word, every sandwich, every glass of water, everything matters. Everything makes already a difference, even a small one. And this can also be very liberating, because it means you can start from where you are. You don't have to first go somewhere else. You are in the middle of the problem. So this is also the moment you become ready. Now you can start to act in a relevant way. So this is what happens when you become a zoop. Basically, it's quite simple. You install a person or a group of people. This is a role. It's not an actual, necessarily one single person. In your organization with the only task to represent the interests of other than human life within your operational sphere. So your operational sphere, whether you're a university or a car dealer or a architecture firm, exist locally and in ecosystems elsewhere that are touched by your actions, and life in that operational sphere is represented by this person, by the person with this task only. It's not concerned with what you do, but it is concerned with that with all your decisions, the interests of other than human life are taken into account. This is the job of the speaker for the Zoe, the speaker for the living. With this person on board, this is interesting, maybe it's interesting to mention, but it's a source for a whole lot of discussion. But briefly, the particular role of the speaker for the living is inspired by the role of the Mary Gardens in the New Zealand Rights of Nature cases, particularly Wanganui River, where the humans that are belonging to the Mary Wanganui tribe, the Wanganui Iwi, can speak on behalf of the river because they are the river. The river, they belong to the ecosystem of the river. That means they partake in it, they participate in it. That means in certain, let's say in ecological terms, they are the river. That means that they can also speak on behalf of it. So they do not, let's say, discuss a kind of, how would you call this? A kind of transcendent union with the river. This is not the kind of logic at all. It's really very grounded. It's really very practical. If we live by the river and the river lives by us, we are part of it and we can speak on behalf of it. It's quite straightforward. So this is possible. And we can learn. The Menno Schildhuizen, the famous urban ecologist, and many actually ecologists before him, puts humans in the ecologically in the place of ecosystem engineers, just like beavers, just like certain ants, actually certain trees. Whales are also ecosystems engineers. And the difference between humans and other living beings is that we don't do a very good job at being it's not everybody, but most of us don't do a very good job, and the whales and the beavers do a pretty good job. But the fact that you are an ecosystem engineer, that you can take, this is a worthy role to have in an ecosystem, and this doesn't mean that everything you do is per definition toxic or violent. That you have this role ecologically means that you can learn how to do it. So again is a way to learn how to become a decent ecosystem engineer. So this is actually the job of this speaker for the living, to help the organization to become a decent decent ecosystems engineer. The learning process. So the speaker for the living is actually the governance model. That person is a teacher, technically a board observer. I won't go into that. That takes me a couple of minutes. I don't have those. The learning process that you engage with the speaker for the living basically amounts to two things. First, you read the way you participate as organization in ecosystems. There's a couple of questions that basically address everything, all bodies that together make up your zoop. Water bodies, governance bodies, legal bodies, organizational bodies, geological bodies, etc., all bodies. Figure out how they are related and to what extent they form relations that sustain all life, or whether they are regenerative or whether they are degenerative. There's a lot more to it, but this is what it comes down to. This gives you a kind of qualitative map of the kind of relations you're engaging with. This gives you the possibility to focus on certain bundles of relations, and then to develop a plan that transforms some of these relations into regenerative ones. And this is what you do as a zoop every year. You focus on certain pain points, the degenerative relations you're engaged with, and make a plan to transform them in regenerative ones. For some relations, this is fairly easy. Turns out our gardens and our pond and our building are are willing objects of transformation. Our mobility scheme, and now I'm saying we, because at Nieuwe Instituut, where I work, we became a zoop. We are practicing this model since over a year now. Some issues are much more thorny and complex and require a lot of collaboration and a lot of, let's say, courageous decision making. This is not the low-hanging fruit. But it is possible, and it depends very much on your intrinsic motivation. So this is what happens. Your ecological concerns move from the background to the foreground. The quality of your decision making, sorry, did you see that color shift in the middle? Yeah. The quality of your decision making changes because concerns for other than human life, basically habitat, food, a chance at forming relations. Again, these are quite grounded concerns. This is not about knowing exactly what a beaver wants at every given moment of the day or night. It's about a bit like a union. Like they don't know everything about all their members, but they know, like, okay, this is proper contracts, secondary labor conditions, these kind of concerns. So a place to live, food, and chance at forming relations. This is enough. If that's concerned, then the rest we can leave to the beavers themselves. We don't need to know more. So that quality of decision making transforms, and by that, gradually your operational sphere transforms. This is a process of years. I'm making it look smooth and seamless. Of course it isn't. But I'm just trying to make a point. I'm trying to sell the idea to you, basically. So this is where we are. Zo op het Nieuwe Instituut. The other three are about to become zoops. This happens 24th of November. You're all welcome to join us in het Nieuwe Instituut. Bodemzicht is a regenerative farm very close to Nijmegen. It's actually only 10 kilometers from here. Very successful, very exemplary practice. De Keuvel is an urban practice, also very exemplary. They phyto-remediated a toxic waste ground of the harbor of Amsterdam and basically kind of made it clean enough for plants and birds, and it's really a thriving place. And they're also developing all kinds of renewable material technologies. Very, very interesting group of people with a global outreach in a way. And the third one is Kunstfort bij Vijfhuizen. Also, this is a heritage site. In its own way, a kind of novel ecosystem. Started to defend, well, this is a long story, I won't go into that. But more working on the narrative and cultural value, and how to insert, how to develop practices that can be adopted, that change values in organizations. This is November. Next year we are looking at starting zoops in 4 to 7 coastal cities in Europe, because we're part of a big European project, and we hope that it will take off from there. If you want to stay informed about the zoop news, please scan the QR code and you can subscribe to our newsletter. That's me.
Thank you, Klaas, and thank you for putting the zoonomy as a dot on our horizon instead of the economy, and to show the decision-making that is needed towards reaching that zoonomy. Thank you for all your great presentations. Can we get a hand for our panelists? But presentations is not what our panel is about, not only at least. And in the true spirit of our conference, we want to discuss with you and reflect with you, and also with the audience, of course. But if you allow me, let me start off. Marianne, you presented your engagement as a scholar activist. So from your experience, can you tell us more about what you believe scientists and researchers should do in fostering courage and emancipation among colleagues and students?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so what I experienced myself is that I felt very lonely initially, very, very lonely. So what I think is really important as senior scientists, especially as you climb up to more seniority, and also for our board of directors, to support and to also show that you are taking the climate emergency seriously. You can do that by, as a board of directors, by declaring the climate emergency as an institute, and also by communicating measures that are taken at university. So also our students, and many of those have a lot of climate anxiety, they need support from teachers. And I know that it really helped to me. For example, I showed you a demonstration of blocking the road. There was a demonstration action against fossil subsidies in the Netherlands. And we were there, and suddenly there was this colleague of mine and it was Professor Klaas Landsman, and he was standing there in his gown, and it was so supportive to me, because up to then I was like a lonely voice at university. I didn't really dare speak out so much. I wasn't that courageous, but him being there in his gown, showing that senior staff also take action, really helps. So I think to our students and to our starting staff, the PhD candidates, it's really important that senior staff speak out.
Thank you, Marianne. Junia, you shared about all the great work you're doing with your organization, but can you share an example where you saw that courage really made a difference, and where it enabled positive change, kind of the change that you might think that's not possible, like beforehand?
Okay, I think the first example I gave was really more on water, but I want to share one for sanitation that's really courageous. And I want to lead this, I think yesterday, for those attending the semi-plenary, there was a question that came up around ecological sanitation. As we all know, ecological sanitation involves, making sure that we make use of waste, human waste, into fertilizer or energy. So, of course, those who started this initiative years back, it was so hard, courageous to tell people that, okay, there's a way you can recycle your waste so that you can later use it as a fertilizer in the food you're going to eat, So it's come a long way through much science and research being done on how best to recycle this waste, and also embarking on sensitizing the communities, the people, of how best to do it and the importance it is, especially now if you link it to energy. So to me, I see that if you're focused on an issue and you feel that you're solving a problem, and you do generate enough evidence of the benefit and that it's going to bring on the table. So, yeah, you should have the courage to convince whoever you have to. As we speak now, ecological sanitation has migrated from, being more into 1 or 2 districts or 1 country. You find that many other countries, both Africa and Asia, and I think, I don't know, but it's being promoted and with registered benefits, especially now that it's linked to biogas and all that. Thank you.
Thank you, Junia. And Klaas, how does your project? I mean, it was quite clear from your presentation that emancipation plays an important role, but I would like to hear a little bit more about the courage aspects of it, because, like, you're kind of calling people to be a voice, to stand up, not only in the capacity as themselves as humans, but I would imagine that takes courage as well. And how does that look like?
I think there's actually 2 very distinct kinds of related kinds of courage involved in ZOOP. One is indeed the one called for through the role of that person or group of people that speak on behalf of other life. This is this is exotic for some people. For some people it comes really easy, but for some people this is exotic, and certainly reception can be a bit awkward in the beginning. But that really is also a question of to what extent this knowledge is grounded in you. If you actually know a little bit about ecosystems and the kind of urban ecologies that the zoo operates in, then you overcome this relatively easy. But the other one is more on the level of the organization that adopts the model. And here's something that is very kind of a particular kind of courage is involved there that does not come easy to most organizations. Certainly not if they're in the commercial sphere. And that's the one to adopt a framework, an attitude of learning. And this, the fact that you publicly learn as a zoop, that you try out things and report on what goes well, but also what you're learning, what goes wrong. This is a kind of courage that a lot of commercial organizations that have this first-time right control culture are severely lacking. But this is the only thing that will get us out of our current, sorry, I'm again nearly using a word that I'm not supposed to use in public, our current predicament into something that might be livable on the midterm, long term. It is the courage to publicly learn and to and also acknowledge that some things do not go right immediately. Yeah,
it takes an attitude of learning and maybe also humility in the process. So let us now turn to you here in the audience and possibly also online. I would like to collect a few questions now and comments also. Like, you don't need to ask a question necessarily, but if you just want to join into the conversation and have comments, please do join in. We have a question or a comment over there and there, but I think I saw you, sir, in the blue sweater first. Yeah, please.
Oh, yeah. Great. Hello. Hello. Really nice presentation today. My question is for you, Klaas. I think your system is very interesting because it actually reminds me of some of the systems that are used at IT companies, where they come up with the initial plan and then they iterate, and it's extreme on the transparency side. But also what's interesting is your comment on commercial companies, because from my vantage point, at least in IT, a lot of times commercial companies, well, in IT, are into this sort of idea of do lots and lots of experimentation, stick with the good stuff and let the bad stuff fall to the wayside, and it's sort of within the organization a public display. But as I've seen universities operate, it seems like that culture doesn't exist in terms of the leadership and the bureaucracy of the parts of the university that need to change to sort of achieve the vision of the ZOOP. And so my question to you would be, how would you recommend we get such a system adopted by a university? End of thought. Thank you.
Kindly state your name and affiliation, maybe.
Yeah, my name's Tanner Tuttle, and I ended up doing my undergrad at Erasmus University, and I did environmental psychology at University of Groningen. And both of those universities were universities where I saw this problem.
Yeah. Thank you. There is at the very back there's a question. Or comment.
Thank you. So as I was listening, I think a really key theme emerged for me, which was maybe a particular population you could each consider that's really needs to be thought about in terms of emancipation. That is, how do we emancipate women and girls from patriarchy and misogyny? So a key part of the transition is the need for that. And I thought, especially Uni, I was thinking about the way your work highlights the invisibility of women and girls in the problem of sanitation and water. And as I'm an organizational learning scholar, it's my field, And I think one of the problems in organizational learning, if we go back to Argris and Senge and Week, is that it has perpetuated patriarchy in organizations. So even those that say that they are a learning organization tend to perpetuate those structures. So then how does UOP not perpetuate those structures? And of course, the issue of women in science and trying to promote women in science. What are the issues that women face is making themselves vulnerable as disruptors. Does that then, how do we address the fragility of women in a vulnerable system when they step out and they are disruptive? So I would be interested in how you could consider that in your work.
Maybe I can collect one more question and then we turn to the panel. Here, yeah.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your presentations and for your work. Klaus, I had a couple of questions for you. So in your introductory remarks, you talked about the pathological logic of capitalism and that it once any part of being is commodified, it not only enters capital flows, but there's an imperative that it enters that. And the organisations that you mentioned, none of them are corporations. So I'm, well, yet. And I'm doing some research with Faith and Nature, which is the first corporation to put nature on the board. And as we're kind of getting into the process, these issues of commodification are becoming more pressing. So I'm just interested in your thinking about that. And then I also wanted to ask you, so I understand it was a very brief presentation, but that there's a fairly open, an open governance model about how this works. But is there something more specific? So, for example, again, if I take the example of Faith and Nature, so they have a voting member who is Nature on the board. There's not a requirement that what nature says has to be agreed with, but if the board takes a decision which is contrary to nature, then they have to publish their decisions contrary to that. So I was just wondering, in governance terms, whether there's any sorts of governance institutions that you've started to develop.
Thank you very much. Sorry, name and affiliate?
So sorry. I'm Danny Solomai. I'm from the Sydney Environment Institute.
Thank you. Thank you. So I would like to give a chance, well, basically for the whole panel, if you feel like addressing the questions, please do. Although there were specific questions for you, Junia and Klaas, but yeah.
So I'll comment on the patriarchy and the vulnerability of women scientists raising their voices. This is something we are very aware of in the Scientist Rebellion group. And so there is a culture of a strong well-being culture. And we really look out for each other's well-being. There are also, and we are using the Extinction Rebellion infrastructure there as well, there are also psychologists, especially post-action, that you can approach if you feel the need. But certainly within Scientist Rebellion, it's I've never felt so supported before. So I think this is a really nice place where there is not so much hierarchy actually. So I really like being there. Yeah. So I encourage everyone to share this and to join to experience how what science can be like. Really nice.
Okay, just to build on that, how to make sure that the women, youth are really, encouraged to join within the decision-making bodies. I'll start, I'll give examples right from national, what is being done, and then at local level, household level, in relation still to, say, a specific sector, water and sanitation. You'll find that nationally, there are policies that have been adopted by government to make sure that women are encouraged, first of all, to gain higher education. For instance, joining university, women, there's an affirmative action where women are given, in addition, they're given extra points. You know, whatever you get, you're given an addition of 1, so that to enable more girls to join university. Now, when it comes to practicing STEM, that's something else, but at least you still see that there's so much talk and sensitization of girls taking up many of the sciences. Now, when it comes to still at national level, you find that many countries they have policies that the different ministries have to annually report how they're ensuring that women are in key decision-making bodies, seats, you know, within the sectors. And this report is compiled and assessed by, for instance, in Uganda, by the Ministry of Gender that's promoting that. Then at local level, there's also a policy that's indicating that, for instance, within the rural communities, where the typical example I gave of such a water source, there has to be a small committee made up of identified community leaders, around 7 of them. And the policy dictates that out of the 7, at least 3 of them have to be women. And they have to take up key decisions, key positions, either chairperson or being in charge of the money that's collected to oversee the maintenance. Yeah. So there are initiatives, but the challenge is ensuring that, yes, they're really monitoring and ensuring that, yes, they're really addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. This gave me a little bit of time to think also. So I'm going to actually try to answer all 3 questions at once because they're deeply interrelated. So how does Radboud become a zoop? What will be needed? How do you avoid replicating the patriarchy? And how does what is the governance logic behind the zoop in case certain frictions, let's say, hinder the essential learning? Actually, they're almost the same question from my perspective. So. And I'll start with the last one because that helps to answer the first 2. So the governance is as light as is possible and as heavy as is needed. Basically, the contract, the zoop contract, means that you commit, the organization that signs the zoop contract on the highest level that is required to sign such a contract, commits to installing a speaker for the living, to work with the advice of the speaker for the living, and to commit to this learning process. The learning process means that you state your own goals and that you publicly, 4 times a year, report on how you are doing. And you're not just, and how you're doing means not just your successes, everything that is also a problem. And the speaker for the living does not have this policing role. This is for another organ. So there's a lot of technicalities to this, how this governance logic works. But there's 2 bodies. There's the Zoonomic Foundation that delegates the speaker for the living. There's the Zoonomic Institute, that's me and my colleagues, that basically check out whether you're publishing your plans, whether you're reporting, and whether you're doing what you said you would do. If you don't, then there's a lot of steps in between, but the ultimate consequence is that you're no longer a zoop. We own the word zoop, and we give you, in a way, we certify the zoop. So as long as you do, as long as you publicly learn, you are a zoop and you're on track. And if you're, so not if you're meeting your goals, this is not the same thing, but as long as you publicly learn, you're a zoop. This is what we need. So how does this avoid replicating the patriarchy? So the living is not just, so the speaker for the living has a, let's say, limited responsibility towards certain, more specific responsibility to other than human bodies, but the zoop as a whole, again, commits not just to emancipating the voices of the other than humans, but actually to take care of the quality of life of all life. This is what it means to become symbiotic. So that means from your ecological reading, it also follows that certain, usually underrepresented groups pop up in your degenerative relations and they become your concern. And then it depends. So this is, let's say, where it is as heavy as needed, as light as possible. It depends on the kind of work of the organization, whether these become your focus points or not. But at some point, they will have to be addressed, because they just cannot pop up without being addressed. But whether this is your first concern or your second or your 10th, that is really dependent on the situation of the organization. But it is definitely part, so the distinction between certain groups of humans is also part of your ecological framework. And as the whole degrowth set of strategies and tactics demonstrate, eco-social principles are really essential to transform our current economy. So these concerns do come to the fore at a certain point. So how does Radboud then become a zoop? This would require rather heavy people to take up this role, people that are not easily swayed, to take up this role of speaker for the living. At first, of course, it demands, I would say, a lot of activism on behalf of the scientists here, to include... I know actually this is a conversation that is already happening. Our current chair of the Zoonomic Foundation works at Radboud and is working on actually turning Radboud into a zoop. It's not a done deal yet, but it is, let's say, in terms of values, a lot of things are in place already, but to actually install a board, a representational board for other than human life in the governance system of the Radboud is not a step that has been taken yet, but there are people that are working on it. So I would say it requires not only it requires the willingness of the top level of governance, that's one thing, but it very much requires the intrinsic motivation of a large group of employees and students of Radboud to actually embrace this. And this is where the transformation happens. It is not just on the board level. It happens in sharing a set of values and based on the shared values, articulate common goals. And it doesn't happen, intrinsic motivation cannot be directed from the top. This is not how it works. Also, this will not help, this will not support a learning process. So I hope I answered all three questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Klaas. I'm just looking at Ingrid whether there's questions coming in from the Zoom. Are there any other questions? Because we would have time for maybe one more question. And if not, I might have a question for Marianne. Like you talked a lot about kind of the courage as a scholar to kind of step up also as activists. I heard a little bit less on about the emancipation side of things, which is also very important, I guess. And one critique that at least I have heard of Extinction Rebellion, for instance, is that different groups of people have very different relations, for instance, with institutions of law and law enforcement. The safe space is not equally as safe for everyone. I don't know how the situation is with Scientist Rebellion, but can you provide some reflections on that?
Yes. Also within Scientist Rebellion, we have scientists with different backgrounds. So it's easy for me. I'm a 50-year-old white woman with a permanent contract. With a Dutch passport, it's easy to, it's not so, it hasn't got many consequences to be arrested. So we appreciate that some people cannot do everything, and that's being accepted in the movement. That's absolutely being accepted, and people who take background roles are also equally valuable and equally important. I know within Extinction Rebellion, I mean, we are a white movement, and not everybody feels welcome at the moment or feels part of the movement as much. And this is something we're going to have to work with. I find this difficult, to be honest. This emancipation is new to me as well. I'm a microbiologist. I'm a kind of a hard scientist. So I'm learning a lot with. That's what I mean by the network of scientists. I'm learning so much from fellow scientists who are working on these kind of fields. But it's not something I'm the best person to answer.
No, and that is fine, of course. I mean, you know, it is a process that we have to enter into. I also ask this from a personal capacity, I have to say. I mean, I'm a researcher, you know, with a non-Western background, growing up in the Netherlands, and in a way, like, you know, I also look. I mean, I'm very supportive, but I also see, like, you know, certain perspectives and my relation with Dutch society, which also
So I see
sometimes
in actions,
hinders.
I see in actions that the police does respond differently to different groups of people, and I've always seen the police as my friend, the people who protect us. I also see a different side now, and as women, actually, as women, we have an advantage here. So I've not met any police violence, or but I've seen it towards men, towards people who look slightly different. Well,
thank you very much, and we're nearing the end of our panel. But before we close, I would like to give a last word to all our panelists, and that is, can you finalize within a minute the following sentence? The most are you timing this? Okay. The most critical contribution for researchers, because most of us are researchers, to advance sustainability transformations is. The most critical contributions of researchers to advance sustainable transformations is. Since you have the microphone.
I don't think I need a minute. So I really think that universities, academic institutes should raise the alarm, and they should really get out of the lab and onto the streets. But it's basically my talk. I think that's the most important thing we can do now. So the public sees how important it is that we take action now. So if we as researchers keep going on with business as usual, then how on earth can we expect society to change at the rate that is necessary? So we really need to step up and be far more vocal than we have been so far.
Thank you. Unia.
I took up 3 minutes. Okay. I'll say it again. Sorry.
Yeah. So the most critical contribution for researchers to advance sustainability transformations is
evidence to justify changing the status quo and solutions.
Thank you. I think that was 1 minute, right?
Half a minute.
Within a minute. Klaas?
Jesus. I think I have to say the following. I'm also, of course, thinking back on the stuff I said. Like, I'm not going to repeat anything, but it's open your knowledge practices and interact. Like, evidence is one thing, but to have proof is one thing, but also to allow your research to lead to behavior change is a completely different thing. So how to integrate social, cultural, scientific, data-driven, validated, situated, these different kinds of knowledge practices, and to make sure that what you research is accessible and useful in a situation where it needs to be applied. But I don't know how to do that, but this is the critical call that we need to answer.
Thank you, Klaas. And as I wrap up, I would like to make you attentive of the final plenary, where we will actually continue this discussion today in a way on courage and emancipation, but particularly on the contribution of inter- and transdisciplinarity. But before we enter into a final plenary, because that's still a day away, we do want to hear you. We do want to hear from you and kind of collect your priorities for inter- and transdisciplinarity. So please do follow the link on this QR code to the survey we have on inter- and transdisciplinarity and fill out our survey on the topic. And finally, I would like to remind you of the conference dinner that we will have at 7:30 in the Vasum. Please check your daily email update to find information on how to get there. You can also go to the reception info desk here at the exit of this building or entrance of the building and get some more pointers. But last but not least, let's give a big hand for our great panelists. Thank you.